Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. The comments made by Pope Francis on his plane ride home from World Youth Day in Rio are still generating headlines and controversy. We'll tell you exactly what the Pope did and didn't say to the press. Joining me to make sense of the papal comments on what he called the gay lobby, Vatican reform, women in the church, and more are the founder of Ignatius Press, Father Joseph Fessio, and Bishop Robert Morlino of Madison, Wisconsin. And later, author, Catholic mom, and pundit Rachel CAMPOS-DUFFY is here, along with her husband, Congressman Sean Duffy, to talk about the latest in politics, family, the culture, including immigration reform, and the budget showdown over Obamacare. And as always, we want you to be part of the program. You can tweet me at Raymond Arroyo or drop us an email at worldover@EWTN.com. Now, here's the brief. News from the world over this week. On Sunday, Pope Francis drew a record crowd of more than 3 million faithful to the closing Mass at World Youth Day Rio. But it was Pope Francis's press conference on his return flight to Rome on Monday that drew worldwide headlines. During a candid 80-minute exchange with reporters, the Pope spoke to a number of hot-button issues. Responding to questions about homosexual clergy, he said, "If they accept the Lord and have goodwill, who am I to judge them?" It was just one of the many fascinating, unscripted comments that has caught the world's attention. Pope Francis also spoke on the role of women in the church and the possibility of female ordination and much more. We will get to all of it in our next segment. Separating the fact from fiction. Ireland's head of state signed the first bill to legalize abortion in that country into law. President Michael Higgins signed the Protection of Life During Pregnancy bill on Tuesday. The law permits the killing of an unborn child in cases where doctors deem the mother's life to be at risk, including a woman's own threat to commit suicide if she's refused an abortion. Higgins had the option of referring the bill to Ireland's Supreme Court to determine its constitutionality instead of signing it. A legal challenge is expected from pro-life advocates. Ireland's constitution requires that the life of the mother and the unborn child be protected equally. More trouble for Christians in Muslim-dominated countries across Africa, starting in Guinea. A two-week escalation of sectarian violence has claimed the lives of 95 people. 17 churches in 5 cities have been burned down or looted. The homes of pastors and other faithful, Christian-owned shops were also ransacked and razed. This, according to World Watch Monitor, a news service that reports on the persecution of Christians. A Muslim cleric has also been killed in the wave of sectarian violence, and a mosque burned down. Guinea's population is 85% Muslim and less than 10% Christian. And at least 24 were killed on Monday in a bomb attack as multiple explosions rocked a Christian enclave in northern Nigeria. No group has claimed responsibility. The jihadist sect Boko Haram is suspected. A bus station in the same district was bombed earlier this year, claiming the lives of 20 people. Meanwhile, the government crackdown against Boko Haram continues. The government announced on Tuesday the arrests of 42 suspected militants. And the Daily News Egypt is reporting that 3 Coptic Orthodox churches were attacked in the city of Minya, about 150 miles south of Cairo. The churches sustained damage from a barrage of Molotov cocktails thrown from pro-Morsi demonstrators. Christians and Muslims in the neighborhood were able to repel break-in attempts. Security forces were on the scene, but no arrests were made. Although they comprise less than 10% of Egypt's population, Christians have been targeted and blamed for the removal of the Islamist-backed president. And Pope Francis's internal reform to the church appears to be continuing after the untimely resignation of several bishops around the world. Starting in Slovenia, the country's 2 archbishops there have stepped down over the apparent financial mismanagement of the Archdiocese of Maribor. Archbishops Marjan Tursek and Anton Stres were the respective coadjutor and auxiliary bishop of the archdiocese in 2011, when it was discovered to be $1 billion in debt. Billion. All due to a string of speculative investments, including a Slovenian TV network with a variety of porn channels. The scandal led to the early resignation of the previous archbishop as well. And financial mismanagement also appears to be at the center of the resignation of Cameroon Archbishop Simon Victor Tonye Bakot. No official reason was given, but Vatican Radio pointed to local news reports alleging the Archbishop's involvement in a number of property-related operations. Clergy and lay faithful have spoken out against his management of the diocese's land. Could the canonization of another pope soon be in the offing? Catholic News Agency is reporting that Pope Francis is considering Pope Pius XII for sainthood. According to a source from the Congregation of the Causes of Saints, the Pope might circumvent the ordinary procedures whereby the World War II-era Pope could only be beatified after a proven miracle is attributed to his intercession. The source said Pope Francis might not wait for medical certification of an unexplained healing, similar to the way he circumvented the process when he approved the cause of John the 23rd last month. Pope Benedict declared Pius XII venerable in December of 2009, based on the recommendation of the committee investigating his cause. The decision has been criticized by some Jews who charge Pius XII did not do enough to protect Jews from the Nazis during the Holocaust. A number of historians dispute those charges. And finally, former U.S. Ambassador to the Vatican and Democratic Congresswoman Lindy Boggs was remembered at a funeral mass in New Orleans on Thursday. She died on Saturday at the age of 97. Boggs was the wife of Louisiana Congressman and Majority Leader Hale Boggs. Following her husband's death, she was elected to his seat in 1973 and served in the House until 1991. Boggs was known as a consensus builder who was at once tough and dripping with Southern charm. She was the first woman elected to Congress from Louisiana, the first woman to chair the Democratic National Convention, and the first female U.S. ambassador to the Holy See. President Bill Clinton named her ambassador to the Vatican in 1997. She held that post until 2001. During her public career, she fought for civil rights, equal rights for women, and the right to life for the unborn. Among her children is ABC and NPR news journalist Cokie Roberts. May Lindy Boggs rest in peace. I have fond memories of her. She was the first person to take me on a tour of the U.S. Capitol behind us. I was 12. When we return, two Jesuits comment on the Jesuit Pope. Father Joseph Fessio of Ignatius Press and Bishop Robert Morlino of Madison will talk about Pope Francis's blockbuster press conference on the way home from Rio and much more. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to the World Over Live. Pope Francis's first trip abroad to World Youth Day in Rio was a rousing success last week. Then, during the 12-hour flight back to Rome on Monday, the Pope spoke to reporters on board for about 80 minutes, answering questions about the gay lobby, the role of women in the church, his own security issues while in Rio, and much more. To unpack what the Pope really said, and to react to some of the coverage, I'm joined by a dynamic duo of Jesuits, founder and editor of Ignatius Press, Father Joseph Fessio, and Bishop of Madison, Wisconsin, His Excellency Robert Morlino. Thank you both for being with us. They join us via satellite from Napa, California.
Very nice to join you from very nice surroundings.
I'll say.
Amen.
I'll say. Bishop, we want to congratulate you. First of all, this is the 10th anniversary of your time as bishop in Madison, so congratulations.
Thank you very much, Raymond, and I'd ask all of your viewers to please keep me in the prayers as we move into the future.
Excellent. Now, listen, while on the plane, the Pope entertained a question about this much-discussed gay lobby operating at the Vatican. I want to share this quote with both Father and the Bishop and the audience. He said, and he said directly, "So much has been written about the gay lobby. I've yet to find on a Vatican identity card the word gay. They say there are some gay people here. I think that when we encounter a gay person, we must make the distinction between the fact of a person being gay and the fact of a lobby, because lobbies are not good, they are bad. If a person is gay and seeks the Lord and has goodwill, who am I to judge that person?" And then he went on and he said, "The Catechism of the Catholic Church explains this very well. It says we must not marginalize these persons, they must be integrated into society. The problem is not that one has this homosexual tendency. No, we must be brothers. This is the first matter. There is also another problem, another one. The problem is to form a lobby of those who have this tendency, a lobby of the greedy people, a lobby of politicians, a lobby of Masons, so many lobbies. This is the most serious problem for me." Father Fessio, Bishop Morlino, is this a change in church teaching as has been suggested in so many of the media reports? Is the Pope saying homosexuals are not only welcome, but somehow the church is changing its teaching regarding them?
Well, the bishop can speak authoritatively here, but as a mere theologian and a Jesuit, I'll say that he said nothing which is not identical with what's in the Catechism. The only thing that might have caused some problem is he used the word gay in a more generic sense. I'm not sure he's aware of how in the English-speaking world the word gay really means a homosexual who's lobbying. That is, someone who's homosexual with that tendency, but is living a chaste life and recognizes the difficulty, doesn't usually identify himself as a gay or herself as a gay.
Mm-hmm. Bishop Morlino,
Raymond, I would just want to add, by way of a kind of a context, we all know pretty well now that after the Second Vatican Council, the mass media conspired with certain individuals within the church and outside the church to bring about a certain spirit of Vatican II, to concoct the spirit as opposed to what actually happened in the council. And I think what's going on now with all of this media hullabaloo is that the same sorts of people are trying to concoct a spirit of Pope Francis rather than the real Pope Francis. And I think that underlies a lot of these misunderstandings.
Raymond, if I could add a bit more
Go ahead. Let me just throw this out, and then I'm going to let you comment, okay. Father Fessio. There is certainly, though, a tonal shift here, a shift in emphasis, yes?
Well, okay. Look at this. The Pope refused to give an interview on the way to Rio, but he gave a 121-minute interview on the way back. Now, I think that was shrewd. If he'd given that interview on the way, the whole World Youth Day, all those days would have been dominated by one or two comments. After that interview, 121 minutes, how many minutes does it take to read the part on homosexuals? Maybe 30 seconds. But that was what the newspapers, the media focused on. It's completely blown out of proportion. So that, I think, is a problem. But it's also true that because he's outgoing and he wants to speak, in a truthful way and in a responsive way, he's not reading from notes. He answered all the questions, didn't refuse a single question. I mean, that's a beautiful thing. But, that's not magisterial. That's not the teaching of the church coming out of a cockpit or of the, the first class, section of an airplane. I mean, I call them aerial bombs, but it's good to have him say that, and it creates a certain interest in what the Catholic Church does think on things. But you can't hold a 2,000-year-old church to a remark made at 40,000 feet of altitude to a bunch of reporters.
I want to play something for you. This is Father James Martin, who is himself a Jesuit, editor of America Magazine, editor at large. Here's what he had to say reflecting on this. I'd like your reactions.
think it's a very pastoral approach. He's even using the word gay, which has not been used before. I mean, they would always use words like homosexual, same-sex attraction, very clinical words. He's doing that. He's speaking, and when you hear him speaking, it's a very pastoral tone. And he's saying, as you know, you said before, who am I to judge, which we have not heard ever. And the other thing was he has not sort of appended that statement with something negative. He hasn't said, well, gays are welcome in the church, but you know, it was a purely positive, welcoming argument, and he quotes the Catechism by saying they shouldn't be marginalized. So I was stunned, and I think most of the reporters on the plane were stunned too.
Your reaction to that?
Well, I would say, Raymond, that people may well have been stunned, but what we're talking about here is an emotional reaction to something. And it's very good to go positive rather than to go negative. I don't think for a minute that Pope Benedict was going as negative as he is portrayed now as having been. I don't believe that at all. But I think to go positive is a good thing, and I think the Holy Father, in reaching out in that way and clearly saying what the teaching of the Church is. If a person has a good will, that means they will what is good. And if a homosexual person wills what is good, then the homosexual person wills his or her own chastity. And that's the issue of concern, the behavior, rather than the fact that they find themselves homosexual.
Father Fessio, what is the catechetical teaching on homosexuality that the Pope is referencing here in full context?
Now, Raymond, why do you ask me when I'm sitting next to an official teacher of the Church?
Well, you're the publisher of UCAT and the Catechism, so I figured you're more than qualified.
I see. But I haven't been looking over my shoulder. I'd be careful what I say here. No, it's very clear what the Catechism teaches, namely that same-sex attraction is a disorder, not a sin, not certain what the causes are, but it's a disorder, and acting upon it is sinful. And the Pope said nothing to undo that. At the same time, and in the same paragraph, the Catechism says we have to respect people with this same-sex attraction as human persons with the dignity of all human persons. They can't be discriminated against as a person. Therefore, they must be welcome insofar as they're part of the human family. But what they choose to do can be judged. If they choose to act upon these tendencies in a way that's contrary to what God's plan is in the moral law, then we can judge that as being sinful or wrong.
No, as I told a reporter this week, whether someone's having sex outside of marriage and they're straight or they're gay, it's both sinful behaviors, and the Church has always called it as such. I mean, this isn't as if it's singling out gay people and allowing everybody else a free pass. Now, the Pope also spoke about women and their role in the Church. First, on the question of the ordination of women, he was very clear. Here's what he said. On the ordination of women, the Church has spoken and said no. John Paul II, in a definitive formulation, said the door is closed. Your thoughts on this and the clarity of this reaction?
Well, from what I've heard about Pope Francis, Raymond, I've never met him, but from what I've heard about him, he's a very decisive and clear and prayerful Jesuit. And again, his overwhelming kindness in terms of dealing with people is the context within which such a quote has to be taken. And he was just showing respect, loving respect for people by telling them the truth. And I believe that that is his style. I mean, depending on the circumstances and so on, I think the impression is being given that he wants to shy away from certain things. He would rather present positively than negatively. Granted, so would I. But at the same time, when the chips are down, I think in as loving a way as he can, he's going to, as it were, say it like it is.
Father Fessio, he then went on and said he called for a deeper theology related to women in the Church. And here's what he said. A church without women would be like an apostolic college without Mary. The Madonna is more important than the apostles. The church herself is feminine, the spouse of Christ and a mother. The role of women doesn't end just with being a mother and with housework. We don't yet have a truly deep theology of women in the church. We talk about whether they can do this or that. Can they be altar girls? Can they be lectors? About a woman as a president of Caritas? But we don't have a deep theology of women in the church. What do you think he means by that?
Well, first of all, Raymond, I don't like as a Jesuit or as a Catholic to criticize the Pope. I'm not sure theology is his forte, or he has a great grasp of the whole history of theology. But as a matter of fact, there's a very deep theology of women in the church that goes all the way back to the fathers of the church in the Middle Ages. De Lubac has a wonderful book called The Motherhood of the Church, on the feminine characteristics of the church. Von Balthasar has written volumes on this. I don't think Pope Francis has had time to read all those, and so maybe he's not aware of them. But I would say there is already a very profound theology of women in the church, and the church as feminine, the church as woman, but it needs to be made more widely known, which is why, Raymond, we have Ignatius Press.
Oh, now, how did I know a commercial was coming? I could feel it building.
Well played.
Look, there was another major story this week, really it was a story last week, about a Monsignor Battista Riccia, who is the Pope Francis appointed to the Vatican Bank. Now, Sandro Magister, who's a great Vaticanista journalist, alleges in a L'Espresso article that Riccia engaged in homosexual activity while serving in the nunciature in Uruguay, and he scandalized officials there reportedly. The Pope responded in this way when asked about this. He said, "I ordered an investigation brevia, and that investigation found nothing. Many times we seem to seek out the sins of somebody's youth and publish them. We're not talking about crimes, which are something else. The abuse of minors, for instance, is a crime. But one can sin and then convert, and the Lord both forgives and forgets. We don't have the right to refuse to forget. It's dangerous. The theology of sin is important. St. Peter committed one of the greatest sins, denying Christ, and yet they made him Pope. Think about that." What do you expect to happen here in this case of this Monsignor?
Well, number one, Raymond, this is a good quote because notice how he simply takes for granted that homosexual activity is a sin. And a person can convert and be forgiven. So that gives you a key into his real understanding of homosexuality. There's something wrong with it, but you can convert and you can be forgiven. So that should be the context for these other remarks about, gay friendliness. But notice he said the initial investigation found nothing. Sandro Magister is a pretty solid man with a lot of evidence, and he's gone out on a limb. I doubt he would have made his statements, and I read his column on this, unless there was pretty substantial evidence. And part of the problem could be that the Pope in the first brief investigation didn't find anything because it had been expunged. Because in the Vatican channels there, these reports didn't get through.
Yeah,
so
that
we'll
seems
see.
to be Magister's assertion.
Yeah, either he's innocent and these are false, which is fine to be cleared, or he's guilty and it hasn't been found out yet and it will be found out. One of the two things. So we'll see. Yeah. And if he's guilty of that but is truly repentant, well, then he can be forgiven and it can be forgotten.
Bishop Morlino,
it takes time, Ray.
Go ahead.
I would just say it takes time to conduct a thorough canonical investigation. I've had to do several myself about various things. And one cannot, within say a month or whatever, one can follow the procedures, but one doesn't necessarily get to the bottom of the matter right the first time one follows those procedures. And usually one question leads to another, and those procedures become more extended. I would call the investigation that the Holy Father did the preliminary investigation. And I would think that that preliminary investigation would yield further questions that then the Holy Father and his collaborators would attend to.
Yeah, and from these comments, it looks like he's even open to closing the Vatican Bank entirely.
Yes, and back on the other question, Raymond, I would hope either that Ricca is found innocent, and therefore the false allegations are shown to be false, or if it turns out that these are true allegations but didn't reach the Pope, then there needs to be a second investigation of how they got, who blocked them, who took them out of the record, you know, who was it that was preventing the Pope from seeing this? Because that is as bad a problem as what the allegations are making themselves.
Before I get to some other very interesting comments the Pope made that got virtually no coverage about divorced and remarried Catholics, we're getting some emails and they're suggesting, they wanted me to ask you all, are you surprised that the Pope raised the question of a Masonic lobby? Did that surprise you at all?
I was surprised, but I think the situation in Europe is a much more serious matter than it is in the United States. In general, there are Masonic lodges historically in Europe that have been into some very nefarious kinds of activity. I don't know what the situation is in Latin America at all, but it did seem strange as an American to hear that Masonic lobby listed among the others. It did surprise me.
Let's go on then and look at these other comments the Pope made, and this was about divorced and remarried Catholics. He said, I believe this is a time of mercy, a change of epoch. It is a kairos moment of mercy in terms of communion for those who have divorced and remarried. It has to be seen within the larger pastoral context of marriage. When the Council of 8 Cardinals meet October 1st through the 3rd, one of the things we'll consider is how to move forward with the pastoral care of marriage. Also, just 15 days ago or so, I met the Secretary of the Synod of Bishops, and maybe it will also focus on the pastoral care of marriage. It's complicated. How are you reading those comments, Father Fessio?
Well, there are some additional comments which are important, too, on that subject. He did say that being divorced and receiving communion and the sacraments is all right. It's being divorced and then attempting a remarriage,
right,
which is the problem, and that he was very clear that that can't be done unless there's an annulment. His other comments said that in a circumstance where a couple is certain that the marriage really never took place, but they don't have enough proof to make it clear to the tribunal, then there may be a pastoral solution for them. But again, that presupposes that there was never a marriage. So from everything he said, and again, this is off the cuff, but it was very precise, it seemed to me, he still is holding very clearly to the Church's teaching that once you're married, you are married, and if you attempt another marriage, you're no longer in full communion with the Church, you can't receive the sacraments. Now, mercy, yes. Pastoral attempts to deal with those situations, yes. But he didn't seem, to me anyway, to give any indication that he was in any way deviating from the Church's traditional teaching on this.
And Raymond, he has also said repeatedly that the protection of the family is one of his major concerns as the Bishop of Rome, as the Supreme Pontiff. And certainly the protection of marriage would indicate that weakening of our position on the indissolubility of marriage would not be one of the ways to protect the family. And I think the Holy Father is very, very serious about family. And, well, we all need to be in these days.
Before I let you go, could you step back for a moment and tell me what are your impressions 6 months into this papacy and watching the Pope in Rio, listening to the full context of his messages as well as these comments to the press? What is the takeaway? What is this approach to the papacy and how does it differ from his predecessors?
Well, I would just say that I've been looking at various interpretations of where Pope Francis might be coming from. And I tend to think myself that he is a crafty old Jesuit, as one author put it, who is even using the press to elicit a certain discussion about issues at a very serious level. He has a gift for getting the attention of the world in terms of his charisma, in terms of his savvy with people. He has a gift for bringing issues to the surface and initiating the dialogue on a very broad scale. And I think that is a perhaps great difference, that he really captures people's attention. But I think in the end, we should always presume that the Pope is Catholic, obviously.
Yeah,
And
that's a good presumption.
Some of the things that are being written almost presume that he's not really Catholic.
Yeah, I agree.
In what they're claiming he's implying and insinuating.
Father Fessio?
Raymond, I remember Father de Lubac, when he was my mentor, said something which stuck with me, that no people are more like Christ than the saints, but no people are more unlike each other than the saints. And that applies to our recent popes. I think we've had popes, wonderful popes. Look at John Paul II, incredibly powerful prophet and teacher. Pope Benedict, probably the most brilliant theological, philosophical pope we've ever had in the history of the church. And now we've got Francis. We don't need any more documents. We've got Vatican II. We've got what John Paul II has written. We've got the whole legacy of Benedict. We need pastoral application of these things, and this pope is a perfect pope to do it. So all three popes, I think, have been wonderfully warm, engaging figures in their own way. But I think Francis is going to add a different dimension here. Raymond, let me just say this. It's a great time to be a Catholic. What other organization in the world is standing up for the fundamental values of truth and goodness and beauty and holiness in the family? It's the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And look at our leaders.
Very good.
It's glorious.
Father Fessio, Bishop Morlino, we will leave it there. Thank you for the analysis and for taking time away, giving us a little of your time.
Delightful to be with you, and to what Father Fessio just said, I say a heartfelt amen.
Okay, and I'll second that amen. Thank you so much. I have a brand new piece analyzing Pope Francis's trip in Rio that puts his comments in some context. I think you'll find it interesting. It's posted now on National Review online and at the National Catholic Register. I've linked it through my Facebook and Twitter pages. It's called The Messy, Alluring Grace of Pope Francis, and I think you'll find something there enjoyable. Make sure to check it out. Up next, Rachel and Sean Duffy join us to talk about the hottest political and cultural stories of the week. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. My next guests are a husband and wife team. It's always nice to have a husband and wife team. She's a frequent guest host on ABC's The View, who writes and blogs about parenting and the pop culture for CatholicVote.org and the Libre Initiative. He represents the 7th Congressional District of Wisconsin. Please welcome back to the program Rachel Campos-Duffy and Congressman Sean Duffy. Thank you both for being here.
It's great to be here, Raymond.
Thanks for having us.
Now let's start. I'm going to start with Rachel. This Huma Anthony Weiner story has dominated the headlines. You had a suffering wife standing there next to her husband as he admitted once again to various indiscretions. You tweeted that you thought this was a setback for women, and you got a vociferous response. First of all, what was the response like, and why did you say that?
I think there was a lot of positive response to what I said. I think a few people were like, oh, leave her alone. I'm not judging her. I think it's wonderful that she wants to repair marriage. I can tell you, as you know, we're a couple that have endured campaigns. It's very stressful as it is, so I can't.
It's easy to be married to me, Raymond.
Yeah. I can't imagine that if you're trying to repair your marriage and be really sincere about it, that you would want to engage in that kind of a, New York City's got to be a pretty
It's a
tough
spectacle.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say she's not being sincere, but I'm saying it's very difficult to manage a marriage, repair something as serious as what their marriage is going through, and engage in a campaign this intense. The reason I said I thought it was a setback is, before we had, we've seen these sex scandals before, and the wives are sort of used as props, and they sit there and they look kind of pitiful, and but they're helping their husbands as being props. I really thought that it was a step forward when Jenny Sanford, during the whole Governor Sanford Appalachian Trail thing, that, she removed herself from that and said, you know what, this is your mess, you deal with it. And I thought that was a step forward for political wives and for women in general. I think that not only has Huma set us back to the old ways, but in fact, I think she's upped the ante. And that is that now we're expected to campaign for him, and at the same time as we're doing this. And I also think, the response from so many other women was that, oh, this was really empowering of her to speak at this press conference and have such a role. And as you know, one of the things that I've been worried about culturally for our girls is what is the definition of empowerment? And if prominent women are defining that as empowerment, we've got trouble.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to ask you. What is the cultural message overall in this story? I mean, we've got a guy who, he's sending intimate pictures of himself over the internet. We've got kids, 25% of young people, according to some of the studies I've read, are doing this. Doesn't this enhance and give legitimacy to what is an aberrant practice and destructive to these kids' futures?
Absolutely, and giving this man a stage like this sends precisely the wrong message. I mean, we at home, us parents, are warning our kids, and here is a situation where he's being rewarded. But again, I would say that I'm concerned about what the definition of empowerment is. Empowerment is self-reliance. Empowerment is a lot of things, but standing there speaking and really enabling somebody with this kind of a serious problem, to me, doesn't speak to empowerment.
Can we rejoin too? I mean, I think it's great that they want to repair their marriage.
Absolutely.
But repairing the marriage doesn't mean you have to stand by him as he does a press conference trying to advance his political career. We know the challenges of a political race and the problems they're going through.
And public life is rough.
Yeah, you get forced picking one or the other, especially when one is having problems here. And I think it's very hard to do both. But again, we don't judge them. I think it's great they're going to try to stick it out and make it work. But I do think it's really tough to work out a marriage and these problems in the midst of a political race.
Yeah, well, have the decency to go away and don't try to run for mayor of New York. I mean, that's now you and I were talking.
It's embarrassing.
It elevates embarrassing revelations, and then it doubles down, and it's trying to force the public to somehow embrace this. I think you cross a cultural Rubicon if you do that. Let's talk about a positive story that broke at almost the same time that you really liked. I have my misgivings, which I'll discuss in a moment. The royal baby. You think this was a big plus? Why?
I think it's great. I have a story on Huffington Post comparing these two families and these two situations. These stories happened at the same time.
The Wieners and the Royals.
The Wieners and the Royals. And I think what we saw when we saw the Wiener thing, I think a lot of people couldn't relate. And interestingly, here's this royal couple that, what do we know about royals? And yet we saw so much we could relate to. I mean, here was this young couple. They come out, and I don't know if you saw the moment where she nervously tries to pass. I mean, we've all had that first moment where we're holding a baby for the first time. We can't believe they let us out of the hospital with this thing. And she's passing it off to him, and he's sort of very self-deprecating about his hair. And we saw so much we loved. It was so life-affirming. It was so family, an affirmation of family and everything that's beautiful, everything that our church stands for. And what was interesting was it kind of outdid the media coverage for the Wieners, which says to me something wonderful about our culture, that all is not lost and that we still have a love of these kinds of very beautiful, no scandal. It's a beautiful story. They're a beautiful couple.
And that's a nice perspective on it. My perspective is a little more cynical. My read was, why do you think people are so obsessed with the royals and the royal birth?
I don't know why.
Well, what do you
I think that, of course, we've always been attracted to this idea of royals and princesses and princes, but I think this couple is unique. I think we're attracted to them because there's something very normal about them.
I think we're attracted to fairy tales. And little girls, you're a princess, and here's a crown. We're going to take you to Disney. You can live in a castle. I think it's an American kind of mythological fairyland they want to live in, and that's part of the attraction and the allure of the royals. I'm not saying it's not a beautiful story, and I love the birth.
Every good relationship has its fairy tale components. I can say that being married to him has an element of that.
And I did see the white steed and carriage out front. Great. I hope this was not a taxpayer's expense, which we will discuss in a moment. But go ahead.
I think that we all want, of course, the fairy tale, but I think that love and marriage and these things that this young couple, there was a lot of dysfunction in the royal family, and I think these two have done it the right way. Even the way she dresses, her modesty, there was a lot to look to.
They're a classy couple.
They're
great. They're great couple.
Great role models in the era of Kardashians and everything else. this is a great story.
I agree. I can agree with that. Look, see, you converted me. You made me a royal.
I made you a royal fan.
You see that? Sean, I want to talk for a moment about this NSA drumbeat we're hearing on Capitol Hill. The NSA, now we learn, is not only collecting this metadata attached to every phone call we make, but maybe collecting data on all of our web searches, all of our web activity. Is it too much? Does it go too far? And does this exceed the limits of privacy?
So we always have to do this balance. We want to make sure we give our government the tools to investigate and keep us safe. But we also want to protect American civil liberties.
Right.
And that's always a balance that we're doing. And the information that's come out recently about the activity of the NSA has a lot of us in the House concerned that we've now tipped into the sphere of civil liberties. And so you're going to see Congress push back and make sure we get back to that balance where, again, the tools are available. But listen, I mean, to collect all and monitor all of this information on the internet, not just on terrorists overseas, but information that's going to so many Americans, that's a concern for us. And so you'll see a lot of us push back on the NSA to try to recapture that balance.
I mean, when Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner, your friend from Wisconsin, who was really the architect of the Patriot Act, when he comes out and says this needs reform, this is not what we intended, and those FISA courts are basically rubber stamping every request they get, something clearly needs to be done.
Yeah, I mean, Jim authored the Patriot Act, and he said, listen, we've given you authority, but we didn't give you this authority. That's an important statement from a guy like Jim Sensenbrenner, and to make sure, again, that we work together and analyze what tools are necessary, because listen, we don't want another 9/11.
Yep.
We do want to give our government the tools to keep us safe. But again, they can't abuse those tools, and if they do, it's our job to put them back in their place.
Let's talk for a moment about another data collection story. There is a story that's breaking. The Obamacare Federal Data Hub, which is a huge federal basin that could be accessed by up to 7 federal agencies.
That's right.
Which would have your Social Security number, your email address, your gender, your it would have all the specs on you and very detailed information, including your sensitive medical records. Does this concern you?
Absolutely. So, I mean, again, it's IRS, it's Homeland Security, it's Social Security, Veterans Administration, the Peace Corps, the Department of Defense. I mean, all of this information is coming together and collected by the federal government.
And this isn't the NSA, it's restricted to. These are 7 agencies, and every bureaucrat in D.C. could pry in.
And those who are implementing Obamacare can actually access this information. I mean, this is a scary now relationship between the American people and their government. I mean, Rachel and I have private conversations. And to think that our private conversations or our private financial information can be analyzed and gathered and viewed by bureaucrats in Washington is incredibly scary. And we've moved from a culture where we used to just talk face to face, but now we've moved to our online conversations, our phone conversations, our texts.
We're oversharing on email and texts. That's how we communicate a lot now.
Right.
This is absolutely frightening.
So what is Congress planning to do about it?
This is part of Obamacare. So as we try to push back and defund Obamacare, as we try to repeal Obamacare, this is part of the bill. And so all of our efforts on Obamacare would include the repeal of the Federal Data Service Hub. So when people get freaked out and think it's only just a certain part of a healthcare reform bill, absolutely not. It's this kind of information, too, that scares us, that's involved in our repeal.
Remember when Nancy Pelosi said we had to pass it to find out what's in it? I think people are finding out what's in it, and this is some of the stuff that we didn't know about.
But the House has passed repeated measures to shut this law down. It never gets through the Senate. The president's not going to sign it. Now there's talk of defunding it as part of what's called a continuing resolution, a major bill to fund the government, but you simply strip out the money for Obamacare. Is that going to happen? Is there enough people to support that?
First of all, elections have consequences. We've continued in the House to argue different segments of Obamacare, why they should be repealed. We've tried to repeal the whole bill, and we've tried to repeal funding for the bill. What's coming up at the end of September is a movement by some in the House and the Senate to actually defund Obamacare, which if we try to do that, we're certain that the president will stand strong and will very likely shut the government down. I think we're at a point now with the American people where they understand this is not a great health care reform bill. Empowering bureaucrats to make health care decisions on behalf of our families is not the right choice. Spending another $1.8 trillion, it doesn't work. And so if we take the focus off what's wrong with this bill and shut the government down and change the conversation, I'm not sure that's going to be the best approach to actually make advancements to repealing this legislation. Listen, I'm open to any movement that'll repeal it. But I also want to win the debate. I don't want to lose in the end.
Yeah. Let's talk very quickly about immigration reform. The Senate passed its bill. Now the ball is in the House's court. Your leader, Representative Boehner, is saying he's not quite sure how to proceed with this. Do you support creating a comprehensive bill similar to the Senate bill, or do this piecemeal?
So first of all, I don't support doing this, voting on the Senate bill. I wouldn't support it. I think we have in the House to go through a step-by-step approach, analyzing each segment of immigration reform. And let me just say, listen, I think we can come to a sweet spot on immigration reform and actually get it done. First off, we need to secure our borders. And not in 1990 security, 1980 security of our borders. We actually have to secure our borders so we know who's coming in and who's coming out. If you secure your borders, we can then look at those who have come here without documentation, and we can offer them a legal status. Now, that's not citizenship. Legal status is one where you can stay here. Yeah. You're not going to be arrested. You're not going to be shipped back to your country of origin. You're not separated by your family. And so in regard to citizenship, what the Senate looks at doing is giving a unique pathway to those who have come here without documentation, or puts them at the head of the line. Listen, I think we have to treat everybody fairly. And by treating them fairly, I think we can offer those who have come here without documentation the ability to apply for citizenship like anybody else in the world. But that means they get at the back of the line. They don't get to jump the line in front of anybody else and everybody else who's applied for American citizenship. If you secure the border, I think Americans want to treat those who have no documentation fairly, which is to give them a legal status. We then work on immigration reform on the border, where we have low skill and high skill labor that can come into our economy and help grow our economy. I think these components will actually work. And listen, conservatives,
and the church is certainly very concerned about family unity, preserving that, and I mean those are legitimate concerns.
Many undocumented people are very vulnerable to crimes that they don't want to report. So I mean, there's a reason to give them a legal status.
And listen, many conservatives, they're Christians. They have faith, and I think they want to help these vulnerable people as well. But they also they want the border secure. So we'll work on the 11 million people who are here without documentation. But this is the last time we're going to have to deal with immigration reform. We're not going to be doing this 15 or 20 or 25 years from now. Okay. We're going to secure the borders. We're going to give legalization to those who come without documentation. Resolve it once and for all, and treat everybody fairly.
Congressman Sean Duffy, Rachel Campos-Duffy, thank you for coming.
Thanks for having us,
See you
Raymond.
again soon.
Thanks, Raymond.
Thank you. You can read Rachel's blog postings at catholicvote.org, and you can follow Sean's work in the U.S. House of Representatives at duffy.house.gov. That's all the time we have. The show continues on Facebook and Twitter. As always, the Twitter and Facebook pages are linked on the left-hand side of my website, RaymondArroyo.com. And don't forget to sign up for my weekly e-blasts. I send advanced guest info and pieces like the one on National Review online to those who subscribe, and it's all free. Be sure to tune in next week. My exclusive interview with Lord David Alton will air. We interviewed him in London. He'll talk about the threats facing us in North Korea and globally. Then we'll tackle the largely unreported human trafficking epidemic. You don't want to miss that. In the meantime, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.